the Vice President of the Texas Institute of Letters. I'm also the host for our new member reading series. Every year, the Texas Institute of Letters welcomes new members into our organization, and we like to celebrate their voices by giving all of us a chance to hear their wonderful works. And so today, we are doing that, and I want to thank all of you for being here with us. And we're going to start with Scott Wiggerman. He is the author of 3 books of poetry, Leaf and Beak Sonnets, Presents, and Vegetables and Other Relationships, and the editor of several volumes, including Wing Beats 1 and 2, Exercises in Practice and Poetry, and 22 Poems and a Prayer for El Paso, winner of the New Mexico Arizona Book Award in 2020. With hundreds of poems published in journals around the world, Wigerman has also been developing his artistic skills in the past few years, and one of his works graces the cover of Anyone's Son, this year's TIL winner for Best First Book of Poetry by husband David Meishen. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you. And thank all of you for being here today, and especially thank the Texas Institute of Letters for including me in as a new member. I was totally shocked when I got an email saying that I had been selected. It is like, wow, I didn't even know I was being considered. So anyway, I am truly honored to be part of so many writers who I know and love and admire, and a number of you whom I've actually published over the years as well in various publishing ventures through our press called Dos Gatos Press. So I also want to thank you for setting up these readings to showcase the new inductees. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump into it then. For years, I had a screensaver on my computer that said, one word distinguishes those who succeed from those who don't: persistence. And I really believe that. And I'm going to start with a very short poem that was rejected at least 24 times over the years before it was published in an anthology called Local News. And then Ted Kuza selected it for an American Life and Poetry column. And now it's on the Poetry Foundation's website. So, you know, I didn't give up on this little poem, and it is just a little poem. It's called Johnsburg, and it's based on the small town that I grew up in just outside Chicago, Johnsburg. At the top of the hill, a towering Catholic church with Gothic spires. Below, a one-pump gas station, a beauty parlor with a picture window. At the town's only 4-way stop sign, a convenience store with a bike stand, and 3 smoke-drenched taverns, their bars of the same solid wood as the church's hard benches, only more polished, more worn down. It's always a little weird to be reading to muted people, you know, but we'll go with that. More than half of my life, however, I lived in Texas, and this is a sonnet about something that anyone who lives in Texas knows all too well. It's from the Southern Poetry Anthology's Texas volume. It's called Love. Grackles, their very name evoking greed, aggression, chaos. Persistent as weeds, a black plague, they swarm in like cloying clouds of pestilence, ill-mannered, siren loud. Called devil birds by some, they persecute the neighborhood, attack my outdoor cats as if they're prey. At dinner time, I stand on guard. The grackles do not wait to land at bowls unfinished, nabbing one kibble per lunge. But one bird brings a sudden smile. For morsel by humble morsel, he flies from bowl to rail to partner. Kibble flows from beak to beak like lovers swapping spit. The bowl cleared, together they caw, then split. And here's another poem that a lot of Texans are, at least lately, familiar with. It's from my collection called Presents, Power Outage. When a house stops breathing, familiar sounds vanish. The air conditioners hum, ceiling fans rattle and swish, refrigerators steady drone, motors and currents replaced by rumbles of distant thunder, and a percolation of raindrops through oaks and pecans. For the first time in months, we open wide the windows, allow the storm's fresh breath to resuscitate our home. But for sporadic flashes of lightning, the world outside is black. We gaze through the serendipitous flicker of candles too long unlit. Our fingers meld together. The dark is quietly comforting. The slow and simple evening inviting. 6 years ago, I moved. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. I moved from Austin to Albuquerque after living in Austin for 35 years. This poem was actually written before I moved here, and it's also from Presence. It's called Fear of Heights. It starts with a jolt, a raw metallic creak before it lurches upward in a labor of physics. The cables, overgrown clotheslines, don't look like they could handle a load of 40 tourists. Yet in the crush of a cabin surrounded by glass, we slowly ascend on the tram's giant pulley. Despite the twilight, I can still make out the brown-red granite of boulders below, the stern veneer of weathered cliffs, spires and pinnacles eroding above the canyon, their size put into perspective only by pine trees, enormous but dwarfed by the mass of the sandias. In the pit of my stomach, something contracts, and my grip instinctively tightens on the rail. Years earlier, panic ensued when I was suspended at the top of a Ferris wheel. No seatbelts then. Legs dangling in the air like a marionette, ears attuned to each axle's every squeal. A single bar of metal, all that held me from free fall. I hover far higher above the ground now, but I trust in ways that I could not then. I shut my eyes, inhale the naked mountain air, let it channel deeply throughout my body. Then I open them to the ethereal night sight of a desert floor coming alive with light, my hands grasping for nothing. Here's another very short, a lot of my poems are very short, which helps with publication because editors don't mind publishing it because they've got a little short, oh, there's only 8 lines. I can fit this in a journal. It's from my first book, Vegetables and Other Relationships. And it's one of the relationship poems. growing pains. An insignificant bead filters from the ceiling on an invisible string of nothing. We watch miserably from the corners of the room as a scant spider accumulates importance. And I thought I'd also read a little bit raunchier poem, one of the vegetable poems. I really tried not to get anything too controversial, but this one's fun. And it goes back to my Illinois roots. It's called Corn. Off come the husks, shucked in a quick striptease. Off come the strands of silk, carefully like fine French underthings. Shorn of these threads, into a hot tub they're plunged. Out they come dripping wet, circled by swirls of steam, slathered and bathed in butter, bright as neon yield signs, sweet kernels spew forth their sticky milk sugars, drain juice down chins like drool. Ears are nibbled to nubs. Cobs are sucked to the marrow. The kitchen is filled with comestible moans. You and I find ravishment fresh from our Midwest fields. Corn must be an Illinois thing, for your husband clearly misconstrues our just got laid smiles. And I'm going to close with a sonnet from my most recent book, Leaf and Beak Sonnets. And it's a poem called Formations. Closes the book, actually. A quiet field of punctuation marks becomes a murmuration. First, the lift, despite a brutal wind, and then the shift across the sky from right to left in arcs that sail in folds, 100 wings as one, apostrophes in sync, an aerial display of feathers, beaks, and last, a pull back down to earth, this sudden dance undone. Our lungs inflate, our breathing bellows cells in movement, rising, falling. That's a fact. My own heart murmurs, beats its wings the same direction over, casts its spells, abandons them. And so, expand, contract. It's how the world began, how we became. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was very, very beautiful. Thank you for sharing your words.
Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Tony Diaz, a writer, activist, and professor. Tony Diaz is also known as El Libro Traficante. He was the first Chicano to earn a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Houston Creative Writing Program. Diaz, is a political analyst on What's Your Point, which airs live weekly on Fox 26 Houston, and he hosts the radio show Latino Politics and News on 90.1 FM KPFT Houston. He founded Nuestra Palabra, Latino Writers Having Their Say, in 1998, and he also hosts their weekly bilingual radio program, which covers Latino literature, art, and politics. His essays have appeared in the Houston Chronicle, Texas Observer, CNN.com, the Los Angeles Times, and Huffington Post Latino Voices. He wrote the novel The Aztec Love God and is included in Hecho en Tejas, the anthology of Texas Mexican writers, and edited the textbook The Mexican American Studies Toolkit. Diaz was the leader and co-founder of the Libro Traficantes, who defied Arizona's ban of Mexican American studies, and he organized a 2012 Libro Traficante caravan to smuggle books banned in Tucson back into Arizona. The Libro Traficantes returned to Texas and fueled the state's campaign for Mexican American Studies, which led to the studies programs being re-implemented. Diaz currently resides in Houston, and he is completing a book titled The Tip of the Pyramid. Welcome, Tony. And don't forget to unmute yourself. Tony, don't forget to unmute yourself. There we go.
Is that better? I'll wait for you to nod your head. Yes, looks like you can hear me now. So thank you so much for convening us. And I really am humbled and honored to join all of you, not just today, but as part of this amazing legacy. And as part of that legacy, we need to always keep in mind that Mexican-American studies, our history and culture, was banned during our lifetime just a few short years ago. And I bring it up because next year we'll be hosting the 10th anniversary of the Libro Traficante Caravan. We'll be following the route that we took from Houston to Tucson to smuggle those banned books back and to create community libraries, which we call underground libraries. And I'll be launching the book, The Tip of the Pyramid, and we are going to make sure that our art, history, and culture is never banned. Again, on that note, I'm going to share some essays because, of course, it's always the writers they go after. And why? Because we have dope and cool ideas. This is called Mind-Altering Prose. Somos libro traficantes. Protect the cultural capital, live on the dividends, banking on your interest as my hashtag trends. How do I make my coin? I coined the phrase, somos libro traficantes. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. With my broad shoulders and broader imaginations, I could have dedicated my life to busting skulls or opening minds. Lucky for you, I want to do time behind books. It's ironic because my folks told me that going to school would keep me out of trouble. Little did they know that those small doses of mind-altering prose were simply starter books. I would grow to get into harder and harder stuff. Worse, I became a kingpin of contraband prose. It's true. I am just evil in nature. I suppose my parents could see this in me all along. They tried to save me. They sent me to a Catholic school, but not even the nuns or the brothers or the priest could change my evil ways no matter how much they hit me. So no, reading Nathaniel Hawthorne's Young Good Men Brown did not turn me into a young good brown man. Instead, I would turn all quiet on the Western Front into all chilling on the West Side. And I turned Macbeth into MC Beth. I couldn't stop myself, no matter how much I was punished. There was no boundary to my imagination. I was always capable of the unimaginable. I respected no limits. I had to get out of Chicago for my own good. Back when I was a kid and a punk would ask me while I was reading a book on the corner, I'd reply, "It's this or beat your ass. I will beat you with the book." And they left me alone. I came to Houston to check out their literary cartels and get my papers, an MFA, which stands for Mighty Fine Aztec. I'm the first Chicano to get an MFA. Of course, it made no sense to me that I'd be the first Chicano to become a Mighty Fine Aztec in Tejaztlan. The sense that makes is nonsense. Texas is occupied Mexico. Being from Chicago, I can smell a racket a mile away, and I wanted in on the action. So I started a gang. In 1998, I started our outfit, NP. Our alias for the outside world was Nuestra Palabra, Latino writers having their say. We were running the streets from day one. We had a crew of 200, capturing imaginations, stealing hearts, and breaking literary rules left and right. By 2002, we were out of control, going from monthly mitotes to larger and larger joints. We put on mega events drawing 30,000 people to the George R. Brown Convention Center, attracting celebrities like George Lopez and Jorge Ramos in limousines at our disposal. All the rest of the world saw was money flying around. They saw capital being made in book sales. That was no big deal. You can sell anything. What I saw was our cultural capital, building and building and building. All the other players could fight for their cuts of the capital. I knew we were monopolizing the real power. We're cultivating our community's cultural capital right under everyone's noses. And the outside world barely understood it. That meant we could just keep cranking out more and more mighty fine Aztecs on our terms, our way, who would become cultural accelerators. But that wasn't enough. I needed more and more and more. There under the streetlights, in the alley of the convention center, running our hands over the literary gold we were trucking across state lines, that our people were consuming in massive doses on the streets of Houston, I knew what we looked like. And instead of being ashamed, it made me more flagrant. Someone asked me, if police roll up on us and ask us what we're doing here so late in the alley, in the dark, what do we say? This time I said, we tell them, somos librotraficantes. ¿Y qué? And we became bigger and bigger and more flagrant. We took over the airwaves, broadcasting NP at 100,000 watts on 90.1 FM. We took over social media while it was just coming of age. We were on TV and conventional media. Our addiction to cultural capital knew no bounds. Of course, there were people watching who wanted to put us in check, but they wouldn't, not just yet. We didn't know there were mighty fine Aztecs in Tucson, Arizona, who were running cultural capital factories of their own on different fronts and different scales, and they were about to be attacked. Our destinies would soon be more directly linked. I've told you before about Arizona's ban of Mexican-American studies, so you know how we launched the 2012 Libro Traficante caravan to smuggle the books back into Tucson, back into Arizona. And now you need to see the larger picture. The far-right Arizona Republicans who attacked our cultural capital were flagrant too. They accused our community's cultural capital of promoting the overthrow of the government. I know language rackets. They wanted Americans to think we try to change the world violently because at the time it was hard to imagine us as intellectuals. What was really happening was that some right-wing Republican politicians were scared of our young Chicanas and Chicanos cracking the spines of books instead of each other. The far right knows how to control gang members, but not cultural accelerators. This ain't a mystery novel. I'm going to ruin the ending for you. Mexican Americans have directly experienced the power of community cultural capital through two potent examples. In 2017, Chicano and Chicanas across the country overturned the banning of Mexican-American studies in Arizona. In 2018, Chicanos advocated and succeeding in getting Mexican-American studies endorsed statewide by the Texas State Board of Education. So now I'm onto a bigger racket. There's a new game in town. I'm going to be dropping weekly doses of cultural capital for edification, spreading mind-altering prose across the entire nation. And because it's 10 years afterwards, Arizona owes us an apologies and some of those books they hid. Been to Arizona, guess now I'm a litigator, gonna run for office, guess I'll be a legislator. How do I make my coin? I coined the phrase, somos librotraficantes, hey, before victory, vatos. Gracias, TIL.
Thank you, Tony. And thank you for getting those books back into Arizona. Next, we're going to hear from David Samuel Levinson. He is the author of the novels Tell Me How This Ends Well and Antonia Lively Breaks the Silence. He's received residencies and awards from Yaddo, the Gentle Foundation, Art Ami, the Santa Fe Arts Institute, the Sewanee Writers Conference, and the Marguerite and Lamar Smith Fellowship for Writers through CSU and the Carson McCullers House in Columbus, Georgia. He was first runner-up in the Flannery O'Connor Story Prize and placed third in the Atlantic Monthly's fiction competition chosen by Mary Getskill. His stories and poetry have appeared in Story South, the Brooklyn Review, Prairie Schooner, the Toronto Quarterly, West Branch, and Post Road, among others. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you, TIL, and everyone who's here. And it's really going to be hard to follow Tony, so you'll have to excuse me. Damn you, Tony. Damn you. That was great, by the way. Scott and Tony, you guys are amazing. So this story, I'm just going to do a little preface. I found the story that I'm about to read you, a few pages of it, on my computer. I wrote it in 2011 and forgot about it. And I was browsing my computer one day and I was like trying to clear shit out. And this story I was like, what is this story? And I started reading it and I started bawling because I had forgotten what it was about. And my friend Cliff, who's here somewhere, Cliff Hutter, I sent it to him. And he was like, yeah, man, it's going to take me a couple weeks, you know? And I was like, fine, there's no rush. And then he read it. And I think he texted me the next day and he was like, fuck, that was amazing. You know, you made me choke up at the end. And part of being a writer for me is moving people. It's sort of the only reason why I want to write, is to move someone. And I don't think I've ever moved anyone, quite frankly. I'm not really sure. It doesn't seem like it. But when Cliff said that, it was like a shot to my heart. And he was like, you need to send this to the New Yorker. And I was like, right. But I did. And it's funny because yesterday I heard from them and they are seriously considering this story. So persistence. It took Sylvia Plath 70 fucking tries to get into the New Yorker. It might take me 70 tries, and I don't know if they'll take this or not, but I'm going to read a few pages from it. It's called The Last Long Lap is the Hardest. And I might tear up. Ben's on the phone with Leopold early Wednesday morning, explaining how he has an important meeting and may be a few minutes late to pick him up. There's a cafe across the street from the station, he tells him. You can wait for me there. Ben pictures Leopold dragging his small overnight suitcase behind him into the cafe, ordering an espresso, and then taking a table near the window to stare at the trains coming and going, or more likely to lean against the glass and leaf through the latest issue of the New Yorker. If Leopold were anyone else, Ben realizes he'd have to explain what kind of cafe it is and what they serve and exactly where it is, although he's already said it. With Leopold, he never has to repeat himself or choose a different word because the one he chose sailed over the other's head, never has to define anything. Not only can Leopold keep up, but he also often exceeds Ben's expectations, beating him at Scrabble, although English isn't his native tongue. He speaks it fluently, better than most Americans. He wasn't surprised to learn Leopold skipped 2 grades in his little magnet school in Interfering, a small hamlet outside Munich, or that his dissertation advisor at Columbia once told Ben how Leopold was the brightest student she ever had. Yes, I can do that, Leopold says, agreeable. The meeting is with his therapist in Catskill, but Ben doesn't tell Leopold this. I'm meeting my new agent, he says, as if Leopold is asked. There isn't a new agent. No roles to discuss, no auditions in the offing. She owns a house not far from here, he adds. Congratulations, Ben, this is good news, Leopold says. It's why you came back after all. In Berlin months ago, Ben applied for and won a spot in a 3-month acting workshop in Franklin, New York. 7 of them in all were handpicked to work with a famous retired actress who ran the workshop out of her converted barn. They lived on the premises and were provided 3 meals a day. On weekends, the actress invited guests up to the property, mostly friends from her days in the theater, other famous actors, a renowned agent or 2, directors, producers. They sat around the dinner table gossiping about this or that Broadway play or musical. Usually, Ben excused himself and went back to his room, disappointed in the behavior of his fellow actors who flirted shamelessly with the rich and powerful guests. It upset Ben to see them like that, desperate and hungry or overconfident and overeager. Schmoozing was part of the game, he understood, but he preferred to let his talent speak for itself and made a point of neither talking about himself nor talking himself up. After he hangs up with Leopold, Ben makes his way out of the house thinking about his last session with Ralph, whose surname, Van Pelt, always makes him giggle. Ben was going on about men, his favorite subject, when Ralph broke in. "You do realize your hatred of men is just a hatred of self, don't you?" Ralph asked, without the hint of irony. "You do realize I'm paying you $175 an hour not to sound like a self-help book, right?" Ben responded. "And just for the record, I don't hate myself. I dislike a subset of men who happen to sleep with other men." And he gazed out the basement window at the brown rivulets of melting snow running into the gutters. "When I came out at 19, I thought I'd finally found my people, a community of men that valued what I did, masculinity, intelligence, loyalty, commitment. But do you know what I found? None of that. I found rampant promiscuity, cowardice, intimacy issues on a scale never seen before or since, intransigent, the likes of which you've never witnessed, and lots of damage. Almost every guy I ever dated thought it was okay to leer at or comment on another guy's ass when he was with me. Almost every guy thought it was okay to tell me about his latest conquest. Almost every guy was an insensitive prick and emotionally abusive in one way, shape, or form. And don't even get me started on the intelligence quotient. Almost every guy, Ralph said, but not all of them. No, not all of them, Ben thinks, recalling Joe, the hottest fuck Italian-American bicycle messenger, who had a huge dick and a degree in biology. He had a calendar of scientific facts sitting on his desk, and every night before he and Ben went to sleep, he read Ben the fact of the day. Ben learned about syzygy, among other things, from Joe. But he liked to call his male friends girl, so that was that. There was also McCracken, the crazy managing editor of The Economist, a closeted alcoholic and worse, a closeted Republican. Then there was Shaker, the brilliant, unfeeling, and self-medicated fuck-up, a South Asian dermatologist who was hopelessly in love with Ben, but still had unresolved feelings for his ex as well and kept comparing Ben to him. Then, of course, there was Leopold. Ben thought moving to New York might have given him a fighting chance and improved his odds of finding a suitable mate, but it didn't. As he liked to tell Ralph, while the numbers worked statistically in his favor, the degrees to which the men were all the same did not. "So what about Leopold?" Ralph asked right before the session was up. "What made him stick out? What made him a keeper?" Ben crosses the Rip Van Winkle Bridge, the Hudson River shimmering below him. "In just a couple of hours, I will collect Leopold from the station, and it will all begin," he thinks, picturing Ralph at his desk across from him. Ben's had a week to prepare his response. "Leopold was just different," he'll tell Ralph. "From the moment we met, he treated me with kindness and respect. He was humble and modest and assumed nothing. On our second date, which ended at a small park in Hunter's Point that overlooked the Manhattan skyline, Leopold confessed he didn't understand American men at all. 'I've been here 9 years,' he said, 'and I've been husband hunting the entire time, but no one wants me. Why do you think that is?' 'Because you aren't rich and you spend most of your time in a library,' Ben replied, knowing that to most men, Leopold's confession would come across as weak and callow. But to Ben, the known world dropped away as Leopold's words rang through him. He stepped out of line, Ben thinks. There was this endless line of men, and Leopold just stepped out of it and waved. He had a feeling Ralph wouldn't understand the metaphor because, in his experience, most gay men had little to no idea what he was talking about at any given time. Ben never pictured himself as the kind of person who had trouble connecting with other men. He was tall and well-built with a deep, resonant voice, a charming, successful actor with qualities that gave him an upper hand in the bedroom, but failed him once he opened his mouth. And there I shall end. The story is so freaking long, but thank you guys. I love being here. I love all of you.
Thank you, David. And I do hope that we get to read the rest of the story in the New Yorker.
Yes,
Wishing you
please
the
pray for
best.
me.
Yes, we
Please.
are. You've got our prayers. Next, we're going to hear from Kevin Prufer. His newest book, The Art of Fiction Poems, is just out. And his book, How He Loved Them, won the Julie Suk Award and was longlisted for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. Others of his poetry collections have won the William Rockhill Nelson Award and been named to the Best of Year list in the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, Book List, Virginia Quarterly Review, and others. He's received several Pushcart Prizes, Best American Poetry Selections, the Lannan Foundation Fellowship, and an NEA grant. He is professor of English at the University of Houston's Creative Writing Program, where he directs the Unsung Master Series, a book series devoted to bringing great but little-known authors to new generations of readers. Welcome, Kevin.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for setting this up and recording it. And it's a real pleasure to be reading with really good writers. I think I've been doing a lot of readings from this new book, and I'm so tired of this new book. I thought I would read other stuff. There's something about reading the same poem over and over and over again into a toaster, which is what Zoom readings always feel like to me. But I thought I'd just maybe read something from a book I'm writing right now and something from a book I wrote a long time ago. This poem is called Poor Hannibal of Carthage. You all know the story of Hannibal, right? He got his troops all the way to the gates of Rome. And then Rome just sort of waited him out. The Romans sort of refused to engage him in any kind of battle. And eventually, his own men sort of were getting hungry and winter was coming. Anyway, this is called Poor Hannibal of Carthage. It takes place on a cruise ship. No one wanted him in the ballroom with the drinks. The stewards gave him such a look that said, poor credit, or Stain said, you have lost us the empire with all of this dithering. And Julia, who wouldn't speak to him, but smiled up at the band. So out to the cruise ship's stern where he could smoke and ash his cigarette into the sea. And the sparks were orange and lovely, spinning into waves, slap of sea against the steel hull, call of a seagull, and the spring and fall of Julia laughing at some rich man's joke. He'd banged his head against it and Rome wouldn't fall. He'd kicked it and thrown his shoulder out against the stones, but no. Over the walls with a torch and a bomb, over the walls with the bodies of peasants and into the street, but Rome like a tank, or Rome like a smile, kept grinding away. The stewards said no, and moved to the other side of the room with the drinks. And the women smiled politely or shook their heads. And even Julia, who had been laughing a moment ago, gave him such a look with narrowed eyes that what could he do, having brought his elephants over the Alps and to the sea, having brought his men against the legions and up to the gates? He'd shoveled the frozen and the stiff away and dropped them from the cliffs. He'd eaten the hoofs of ice-cold horses and touched the walls of Rome, had touched the very gates, then hurled a burning peasant's body over the crenellations and into the street. From far away, he heard them laughing, the ice that sang in their drinks, the ship's band playing such a tune that wafted on the breezes like contagion, and Julia dancing in her ball gown, arms around another man, and the dull sweep of light through the portholes and over the deck, all the way from Carthage and up the Spanish coast through camps where old men tended dying flames, Gaul and the Avernii, and still he couldn't have a drink or some thin woman's hips against him. He dropped his cigarette into the sea. Failure, failure, the women said, turning away, and sorry, old boy, from their dates, stirring their drinks and calling to the band, and even the stewards, who should have carried him in a golden box, said no, as though he were a germ or a loss. Rome still standing. Rome in its lovely dress of blue lights. Rome in its lipstick and its pearls. Rome in its laughter and lilac perfume in the arms of another, her breath upon his cheek, while the ship moved on to a freezing island he never chose to see. I always thought that freezing island was like the land of the dead or something. I'm just going to read one other poem. I'm only going to read two poems because these are sort of longer poems. I have these plus signs in my poems where I try to pause when I read them. I have this fantasy that every section is sort of in addition to the previous section, and then there's this imaginary equal sign at the end. So anyway, there you have that. Y'all know that poem by W.H. Auden called The Fall of Rome? You know what? I could just read it. Hold on a second. It's so short. I'm going to call it up. He has this wonderful poem called The Fall of Rome. It goes like this. It's a tiny little poem. The piers are pummeled by the waves. In a lonely field, the rain lashes an abandoned train. Outlaws fill the mountain caves. Fantastic grow the evening gowns. Agents of the fisc pursue absconding tax defaulters through the sewers of provincial towns. Private rites of magic send the temple prostitutes to sleep. All the literati keep an imaginary friend. Cerebrotonic Cato may extol the ancient disciplines, but the muscle-bound Marines mutiny for food and pay. And Caesar's double bed is warm as an unimportant clerk writes, I do not like my work on a pink official form. Unendowed with wealth or pity, little birds with scarlet legs sitting on their speckled eggs, I each flu-infected city. All together elsewhere, vast herds of reindeer move across miles and miles of golden moss, silently and very fast. All right, I wish I'd written that, but I didn't write that. But I did write this poem called W.H. Audens, The Fall of Rome, because I was just so amazed by that last image of the reindeer, you know, running across the fields of golden moss. So this poem is called W.H. Audens, The Fall of Rome. It's the first time I've ever read it out loud, so there you go. In the final lines of his great poem, The Fall of Rome, Auden describes not the facts of the late empire's fall, but distant herds of reindeer moving quickly and silently across vast expanses of golden moss. We don't know where those herds are, only that they seem impossibly far from the troubles of men, not mindless, but beyond mind, uncountable, twilit, inhuman, unconcerned with the failures of empire. So the mind, my mind, tries to concur, but the gap is too great. I cannot move from mundanity to vastness, to the erasure of the self into vastness. Though I once stood in my front yard and with a kind of finality understood that one day I would die. I was 10 years old. We had apple trees then, and the wind riffled through them. The cat slept on the porch. The sunlight was honey. You will die, you will die, you will die. It was the only accounting I could give myself. A vastness, thrilling, an acknowledgement of the cancellation physicists say existed outside the bubble of the young, expanding universe. What was on the other side of that skin? Nothing was. Zero was. Death was. Herds of reindeer traversing golden moss. What I'm talking about here is the thrill of terror. Years later, looking out the window as a Mexican gardener pushed his wheelbarrow past students throwing frisbees on the quad while my professor went on about the failures of Domitian, I felt it again, a certainty that words weren't imperfect mirrors reflecting reality, but that they created a reality out of nothing, a scrim concealing emptiness, You will die, you will die. My mind told my body that was, in fact, already at work on its own demise. I am tired of the idea that art must assert the identity of the artist against the vastness of immediate social forces, when a more pressing problem might be what my friend Reginald called the experience of being no one at all, existing however contingently outside the shackles of identity and definition. That is the destination we are all approaching, and I want to understand it before I get there. I suppose Reginald understands it now, having died 15 years ago in Sarasota. We talked on the phone a lot in those days. He spoke quickly, like he wanted to communicate many ideas before he forgot them all, as if he didn't have enough time. I cradled the phone against my shoulder, stirring a pot of stew while the CD player played the Ramones, and Mary pulled her Toyota up the snow-covered driveway. And Reginald went on about how his poetry could never quite exactly communicate every nuance of a particular experience perfectly. And now he is altogether elsewhere. Not outside the expanding universe, but not in it either. At any rate, he cannot explain his position. And those reindeer I keep mentioning, and their never-ending tundra, unconcerned with us, silent, unlocatable. The mind has motion, tides, breezes, the world too. The reindeer are moving. I can't get closer to death than that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us this morning and sharing your beautiful words. And I want to invite everybody to return in 2 weeks. On April 10th, we will have our final reading for our new member reading series, and it will feature Preston Lewis, Brian Washington, and Chris Barton. So I hope all of you are able to join us. In the meantime, happy reading and happy writing. Thanks to all.